Bienvenue, which is welcome in French. And a couple of housekeeping things is please silence your phones. And secondly is there is a presentation and some photographs at the back of the room, which you'll be able to look at later on. And what else did I want to say? Oh, and questions will be open for questions and answers at the end. Okay? So, bienvenue, welcome to the Unitarian Church here in Bernardston, and thank you to Mark and Annette for having me here to present. I would like to introduce Sally Jones, who is my partner in presenting this and also in the creation of this presentation. And I'd like to introduce to you my son Daniel, who is the grandson of Gaston Joyeux, who's my father. I want to give you a little background on how this came about. When my parents left their home in Pittsburgh, I am the only child, I closed everything up and boxed everything and dragged the boxes with me wherever I moved. Didn't bother to open a lot of them. But during the pandemic, I was looking for something and I opened this box. And lo and behold, it was full of things that were my father's. And there was a document that he had handwritten, and I'm not sure when he had done that because it wasn't dated, but he talked about some of his war experiences. Things that he had never talked about with me. He told me very little, and like so many veterans, did not talk about their experiences. So I started doing a translation of the things that I found, but I consider my French to be what I call kitchen French. Sally is a French professor from Eagle Brook, and she is part of my French group called Bonjour. And I asked her to please look at my translations and see if they were correct. And she did, and she became very engaged in what was in the box. And together, over the past 2 years, we've put together this presentation. Sally, will you start?
Okay, so this is the Odyssey of Gaston Joyeux from more or less 1940 to 1945.
Let me just say here, for those of you who don't speak French, that joyeux means happy, like Joyeux Noel. So a tough name to live up to. And this is also my son Daniel's middle name, Daniel Joyeux Dupuis.
Born in Tours, France, on the 17th of September, 1920.
And this is a picture of my father at 20 years old.
So here we are, 1936, where Gaston is a student at Angers Technical School. And this you may recognize as the Eiffel Tower. And you'll see very shortly that Gaston is going to be an electrician apprentice who will be working in the Eiffel Tower. This particular picture was taken was made as a drawing and a painting from the original 1889 opening of the Eiffel Tower as it had been built for the World's Fair in Paris at that point.
Sally, what color was
Oh. It was originally red, right? Yeah. Okay. And as I said, he will be an apprentice electrician. First of all, at the Opéra Garnier in Paris. And then he becomes a certified electrician and is hired by the Opéra de Paris.
And this began his love for opera that he pursued through his life.
And you may well recognize that chandelier as part of the opera
Phantom
Yeah.
of the Opera.
Phantom of the Opera.
Oh, yes.
So ironically, on June 28th, 1940, Hitler chose to make the Opéra Garnier his first stop on his only visit to Paris. And note that the street signs are now in German.
And I would like for us to think for a moment about how we would feel if we were in New York City or in Washington, D.C., and all of the signs would be in German, not in English, how that would make us feel.
So he will return then to Saumur to do his military service at La Cavalerie de Saumur.
Saumur is where he was raised. He was born in Tours, but he was raised in the town of Saumur. A little background information on the Cavalerie de Saumur. Way back when, if you were a nobleman, you would send your son to the cavalry. It was sort of like Annapolis or West Point at the time. And it still exists, and there was a real rivalry in Saumur when my father was growing up, sort of a town gown thing, you know, because the rich boys were still going to the cavalry, and my father was a townie, so got in a lot of trouble.
Okay. He was also a fanatic rugby player, and he played for the local team of Saumur.
And there he is, the cross above his head. That's my father Gaston. And I remember in France when I was a little girl going with my mother to see him play rugby.
And then he will become a soldier in the 15e Génie de Satory, not very far from Versailles. And that is the Génie is the equivalent of the U.S. Corps of Army Engineers.
Okay. After between World War I and World War II, the French believed that the Germans would retaliate for their loss in World War I, and in preparation of what was to come, they built the Maginot Line, which was fortifications on the border between Germany and France. And however, it did not continue along the Belgium border. French didn't feel that it needed to because of the Ardennes forest, which was very rough terrain with very few roads. They didn't think that if the Germans were going to invade that they would come that way. Unfortunately, the commander of the troop, the German troops, had spent time in the Ardennes. He knew the territory, and this is the way that the German army marched into France. They had more manpower, and they had much better tanks, and they came right through Belgium and then onto the Battle of France, and after that marched right into Paris and occupied the northern part of France, and then set up a puppet government in Vichy, in southern France.
In the meantime, Gaston is beginning his military service as a private second class as member of the Génie, and that he gets trapped in this situation.
Just to let you know some statistics about the Battle of France, approximately 50,000 to 90,000 French soldiers were killed at that battle. 1.8 million were captured, with 1,575,000 French soldiers taken prisoner of war and taken to Germany, where approximately 940,000 of them remained as prisoners of war until 1945, my father being one of them.
And then on June 15th, 1940, Marshal Pétain and the government sell out their own country to the Nazis. And Pétain, whose picture is in the poster, sort of thought that this was a way to save France. But
And because he had been in World War I, Philippe Pétain had been a hero, considered a hero by the French. So he had the support of many of the French citizenry, but Charles de Gaulle, as we know, had his own supporters who supported the resistance, and they were at odds with each other.
So Gaston becomes a French prisoner of war, and as of the 15th of June 1940. And he's made to march along on foot, along with 2,000 other French soldiers from Étampes, which is down at the bottom, just below Paris, to Belgium.
And Sally, how old is he there? Is he like 20?
Yes, 20 years old.
So the trek that Gaston had to do as a prisoner of war is shown here in the, and it's hard for you to see, I know, but the different colors are each day's march.
Oh.
And it goes from Étréchy all the way up, and you'll see, to almost the Belgian border. On foot. They get to spend one day not marching in the town of Amiens. And Amiens was very badly bombed, first in World War I, and then again in World War II. So there's the angel who's crying for her cathedral and her town. Okay, he's back marching and ends up in the town of Marquise, where he's going to make his first escape. With his friend René Moutarde, they fake going to the latrine and escape.
And this is a photo of a latrine.
Gaston will then seek refuge in Varennes-sur-Loire at his uncle Maurice's, thinking that he would be more safe and sound in the hamlet than in the town of Saumur.
The Collabos, collaborators in the Vichy government who sold France to the Nazis. This is French police, and notice the gesture of Heil Hitler. The word Collabos became part of the lexicon at that time, and what it meant was that your neighbor or family member would turn you in to the police for either real or perceived things that you would have done. It was very common for people to turn against one another in order to get something in return from the police or from the Germans, because everybody was trying to survive.
Curses. Apprehended by the French police of Vichy, he is again a prisoner of war and sent off to the Sudetenland in Poland.
Now, one of the things that my father had told me was that when they found him in Varennes-sur-Loire and they brought him to Saumur, they wanted to know where his friend René Moutarde was, and my father wouldn't give him up. So they beat my father very badly and cut his tongue so that he would talk, and he never did. And because they were sending him then into Germany or to Poland, they got my grandmother to come and say goodbye to him, and his face was so swollen and so badly beaten that they had to put compresses on his eyes so that he could open his eyes to say goodbye to his mother.
So in a disciplined camp, he is made to work in the salt mines of Sumperk, Poland.
I want to say here that the fact that my father had a skill, that he was a skilled electrician, helped save his life. the German men were at war, women were working in the factories, so they utilized him as a laborer. And of course, the fact that he was not Jewish also helped save his life, but mainly it was because he had a skill. So when I do the presentation to high school students, I stress the importance of not only academic,
schools.
yeah, not only academic learning, but learn how to do something. Yeah.
Then he has to work on the railroad cleaning second-class cars. And then for a year, he would work in the tobacco factory where he would steal 2 to 3 pounds of tobacco a day. And as he said, I brought that back to the barracks and all the guys were happy.
Now you have to, and maybe you know this from war movies you've seen, but cigarettes were like gold at that time. So the fact that he would bring this tobacco back to the Stalag and he would share it with his fellow prisoners, like he said, for a year he was king of the Stalag. And well, you'll see.
Okay. A girl, Wanda, encourages him to escape and brings him clothes from her husband who has gone to war. Gaston hides them in the factory until an opportune moment.
Now, he did tell me this part of his story, and I sort of got from what he told me that maybe there was a little liaison between Wanda and the girl. I'm not certain, but so yes, she did. She brought to the factory articles of clothing, and also my father told me that the German women were very, very kind to him. They would bring their electrical appliances for him to repair, and then they would smuggle food into him. So,
While working in the tobacco factory, Gaston sabotages the nightlight to dim only. Since dark is what brings out your light, Robert Frost. A German soldier then comes to the Stalag seeking Gaston, the electrician, to come and rewire the faulty current at the factory.
so at this point, I'm not sure what he did with the guard that brought him there. I leave that to your imagination.
But he's able to change his clothes and then flee again on foot as far as Eger, Hungary. Yeah. And then he heads for France via Landau, Germany, where he is recaptured by the Kraut railroad workers and led to Reciburs, camp number 138.
So by this point, the Germans had it with my father and his various escape attempts, and now they are sending him to Reciburs, which is one of the labor camps that was part of the Auschwitz compound. Before this, I did my research. I thought that Auschwitz was one camp, but actually it wasn't. It was Birkenau. There was Auschwitz, which was the extermination camp, but there were also 43 labor camps that were part of that compound. And so my father, not being Jewish, was put in a labor camp.
Reciburs became a part of Germany in 1939 and then became Polish after World War II. But the Stalag 8B 344 was part of the Arbeitskommandos of Auschwitz. I'm not going to pronounce the Polish, but Arbeitskommando is the work camp. Terrible moment, says Gaston, doing water detail for the steel forge in Camp E138.
If you go to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., you will see not only a reproduction of the gate leading into Auschwitz, and you'll see a reproduction of the train cars, but this is what the bunks in the Stalag looked like. My father did share with me that the fellow that was in the top bunk bed died, and he and the fellow beneath him did not report him dead, kept collecting his food until the body came to the point that they had to say that he had died.
So, under the shield of the fortuitous arrival of Soviet troops chasing out the German soldiers, that is the Wehrmacht, Gaston again escapes with 4 buddies. They split up after crossing the Carpathian Mountains into Czechoslovakia. Gaston is taken in by the family Caldo in Brno, Moravia, Czechoslovakia.
And he stayed there until they brought him back to health. I mean, you can imagine that he was incredibly thin and sick, and this family took him in. I contacted the Czechoslovakian consulate. I thought perhaps I could find the family since I had the name, and perhaps there would be a grandchild who would remember and say, oh yes, I remember my grandmother talking about the fact that they had taken in a French soldier, but I never got any response, so that was a dead end for me.
What was that picture?
That's the town of
Brno.
Moravia, and this is just, you know,
Bodies in this?
those are not bodies.
No, it's where they were cleaning out the apartments and
And the buildings that were destroyed.
yeah. So the Soviet troops chased out the Nazis in Brno from the 25th of March to the 5th of May in 1945. As he has little appreciation for the Soviets, Gaston has the Calda daughter, Annika, drive him to Pilsen near the American zone, which there is the town of Pilsen, and this is the American zone. Once inside the American zone, Gaston is rescued by a black soldier who gives him his coat as Gaston is freezing. A black GI stood by the door. I never saw a black before. He'll set me free before I die. He must be the Messiah. Sonja Weiss, in 1945, Gunskirchen concentration camp, and Gaston thought exactly the same thing. The soldier was part of the Black Panthers, a black tank battalion under the command of General Patton. The black soldier was probably saved Gaston's life, as did another black soldier, saved the life of Samuel Pizarro, stepfather of Tony Blinken,
Our Secretary of State.
when the Allies were liberating Dachau concentration camp. Samuel escaped from a Nazi forced death march and was rescued by another U.S. black soldier.
At that time, the Army was not integrated, so the black battalions were called the Black Panthers.
Gaston is sent to Auschwitz U.S. Army Medical Site in Germany, and then to Ypres, Belgium, and Antony, France, for medical attention.
When the American soldier found him, he had absolutely no documentation. He could not prove who he was, and so they categorized him as an escaped soldier, and immediately he said they sent him to the showers. Apparently he smelled quite badly.
Gaston is repatriated the 23rd of June 1945 after 5 years as a Nazi prisoner. Following a period of convalescence in Antony near Paris, Gaston returns to his uncle Maurice's in Varennes-sur-Loire.
And I took this picture when I was in France in May. And the gate in the front, I mean, is as it always was, as I remember it as a child.
The remarkable and arduous route of Gaston as a prisoner in the red, an escapee in blue, and green as a free man.
That's interesting.
And that's over approximately 250 miles. Shortly after his return to Brittany, Gaston goes to the Basque region of France to be head of the explosive ordnance disposal of the German blockhouses in the Cap Breton area of the Atlantic Wall.
He did this for several months until he saw enough of his colleagues blown to bits by the detonated mines and decided that that was enough, and he stopped doing that. But if you travel the coast along the English Channel, you'll still see many blockhouses. I mean, they were, cement thick that you could just, yeah. Some of them are gone, but some of them are used like this.
Upon his return to Brittany, he is employed by the naval yard at Saint-Nazaire. He marries Louise, and they have a little girl.
And there she is, all grown up. Yes, he was a maritime electrician, and because Saint-Nazaire was and is a very important shipbuilding town in France, built ships, oilers, tankers for Onassis, and now build many of the big cruise lines that you see are built in Saint-Nazaire. The Germans had a huge submarine pen at Saint-Nazaire because it was occupied France at that time. As a matter of fact, that part of Brittany was called the Pocket, and it was the last part of France to be liberated. My grandmother and my mother lived in Saint-Nazaire at that time. My mother didn't know my dad. But when the Allies bombed the hell out of Saint-Nazaire, trying to get the Germans out of there and destroy their submarine pen, which they never succeeded in doing. But the sirens would go off. They would go to air raid shelters. And at that time, my mother was an apprentice seamstress. And so when she went to the air raid shelters, she had a little cardboard suitcase about this big with her needles and her threads and her scissors, because she would go to school in the morning when they were let out. One morning they were let out, and the house was totally destroyed. They lost everything, even her bicycle, which she kept in the house, thinking that it would be safe there. And then she and my grandmother were refugees out in the countryside, where my mother continued sewing and making reparations of clothing. One child's clothes was passed down to another, and she would alter them to fit, and they would do that and barter for eggs or chickens or food. Can you go back?
Yeah. Gaston is still on his quest for liberty when he decides to follow the path of the statue created by his compatriot Auguste Bartholdi. So he applies for a passport to immigrate to the U.S. with his immediate family. And yeah, you recognize the person in the bottom there.
This is the ship that we came on. My mother, my father, myself, my maternal grandmother, and my first cousin. None of us spoke a word of English. And I remember being on that ship, pulling into New York Harbor at 7 years old and looking at the skyline of New York. I had come from a very small seaside village, and I was awestruck, obviously.
And this is Le Liberté leaving Le Havre with Joyeux aboard. And Le Liberté, now a French liner, on the 13th of October in 1954, before the Statue of Liberty. another gift of France, offering liberty to the family Joyeux on board. With deep emotion, Gaston salutes his grand Lady Liberty as the ship passes by. And by the power of one word, I start my life over. I am born to know you, to name you Liberty. By Paul Éluard, 1942. Paul Éluard is a French poet.
The, at the end of the document, where a lot of this information came from, my father says, the bad weed, only said it in French, the bad weed does not die easily. A quote from Gaston and Candide, my father referring to himself as a bad weed that the Nazis couldn't kill. So there we are, Gaston, 17th of February, 1920, died January 16th, 1998. Bravo, Gaston.
Gaston.
I want to take a moment to read something. When my father was in an assisted living facility in Pittsburgh, he told his story to the activities director, and a church in Pittsburgh was going to give Christmas presents, and she said, perhaps you would like something for Christmas from the church. And he said, I would like a sweatshirt that says something about freedom. And so he wrote an essay, and he did get his sweatshirt, by the way, and he wrote, nobody knows exactly what freedom is until you've lost it. I did on June 15th, 1940. I was taken prisoner by the German army and spent 5 years in different stalags. As a prisoner, I lost all my freedoms. Even the right to worship the Lord was forbidden. On 1945, I met my first American GI near Pilsen, Czechoslovakia. He was a huge black American soldier who offered me his coat because when he found me, I was freezing. I kissed and hugged this soldier. I was saved. I knew America was the best country in the world. I still remember that soldier's face today, even after so many years. I brought my wife and daughter to America on October 13th, 1954. As we passed the Statue of Liberty, I saluted her. I knew then that I would recover my freedom forever. Freedom is a blessing that should never be abused. It is too precious. And the American prisoner of war who brought my father the sweatshirt after meeting my father said, God bless Gaston. He went through hell. A brave man, not afraid to reveal his fears and emotions. And Gaston confessed he still has nightmares of German tanks rumbling toward him. As an adult, let me go back. As a child, I remember vividly sleeping in the room across the hallway from my parents and hearing my father scream in terror at night. And later, as an adult, he and I were having dinner together, and he said that he came to realize that he had suffered from post-traumatic stress. But of course, at that time, undiagnosed and untreated. You know, you came out of the concentration camp one day, it's like, okay, get a job the next day. So he did at that point go to the American VA to talk to somebody about his PTSD. So it was difficult to have him as a father. The PSD certainly, really weighed on him heavily. As a result of his war experiences, my father knew absolutely no fear. As he would say, they put me in jail, so what? They put me in solitary confinement, they starved me, they beat me, so what? And I have to tell you, it's not good to have no fear. You have to have a little bit of fear because being fearless can get you into a lot of trouble. But anyway, to me, he's a hero. That's what I come from. That's what Daniel comes from. And I'm proud to say he was my dad. So thank you very much for coming. Take a look back there on the desk where people were sitting. There are some pictures of my father. He, 1951, after he married my mother, he was hired by a French company to work in Senegal, in Dakar, to work as an electrician on a dam there. And there were pictures with him with some of the, the natives of that part of the world. We came to America and didn't speak English, but he got a job at Gimbel's department store, where they called him Frenchie, and he changed light bulbs until until he learned to speak the language, and then of course there was no staying at home, and there was no English as a second language then. You know, they threw my cousin and I right into elementary school, and it was a time when little girls in America had the Shirley Temple, you know, curls. As you saw in the picture in the article, you know, I had very short hair and I had little gold earrings, and the kids just didn't know what to make of me. It was like I stepped out of National Geographic or something. But I did eventually learn to speak English thanks to a wonderful teacher. I grew up, you know, being American and being French. Just a little side note that's interesting. So at my fraternal grandmother's deathbed, my father was there. I always thought I was 100% French and kind of proud of that. But on her deathbed, my grandmother tells my father that the man that raised you, that you thought was your father, was not your father. That your father was an American soldier from World War I. And my father asked, what was his name? And she said, it's not important. And I thought about that for a really long time. And then I thought, maybe she didn't know his name. Maybe it was a one night thing. You know, maybe she was raped. Or maybe it was maybe it was an affair. I have no idea. But anyway, there's a quarter of me that is American, and I know nothing about that part of me. So, any questions?
You didn't say much about your mother, and I sort of wonder how well she adapted to life in a new country.
My father became an American, as you can tell from what I've read. You know, he loved America. He loved Pittsburgh. They would travel back to France every 2 years as a family, but he had no desire to ever go back to live in France. Whereas my mother missed her family terribly, and she would have gone back. She would have gone back in a heartbeat. And not to say that, you know, life was bad in America. They both worked. She was a seamstress and had her own business. You know, we weren't rich, but we weren't poor. I never wanted for anything. But my mother very much missed her family and missed her homeland. Yeah. And as a matter of fact, my father wanted his ashes to be thrown in the rivers around Pittsburgh where he fished. So that's what I did. And I took my mother's ashes back to France and I put them in the ocean where she used to go fishing with her father. So, yeah. Any other questions? Peter?
Yes, your father changed light bulbs in Pittsburgh.
Yes.
When he arrived in the U.S. and moved to Pittsburgh. What happened after that? What was his career like after he was changing light bulbs in Gimbel?
Well, after he left Gimbel's, he could speak English. He, as you saw here, he had some experience working in a steel forge. And so Pittsburgh being a big steel town, he applied for jobs at the steel mills, and he was hired as an electrician in the steel mills, where he worked for quite a long time, and eventually was hired by Allegheny County, which is the county that Pittsburgh is in, and he became head electrician for senior housing and low-income housing, and that's where he retired from, in Pittsburgh. Any other questions? Yes.
Chantal, when did you start, what prompted you to start doing this research back when you first went to France to look at the documents? Can you talk a little about how difficult it was to even make contact with the government and the archives?
Well, as you missed the early part, but I'm happy to repeat it, is that after my parents left their home and were in the assisted living facility, I closed up the house to sell it. And a lot of things got thrown away, but I apparently kept these documents, put them in the box, and just moved the box with me everywhere I went and never opened it. And then at some point when the pandemic started, I was looking for something in the closet. I saw this box, I opened it, and lo and behold, there were things about my father. One was his old passports and a sheet of paper, no notebook paper, no bigger than this, line where he had written in his handwriting when he was captured, some of the camps that he had gone to, things that I never ever knew, and I was just amazed. Also in there were documents from the government because at some point the French government implemented a prisoner of war pension. And so my father applied for the pension. And of course, in order to receive that pension, he had to document. I was captured here. I was sent to this camp. I was sent to that camp. So, and then he eventually did receive his pension until he died. But that was where I got a lot of the information. But it was certainly what he wrote was not fully fleshed out. It left a lot for us to fill in. Sally was a terrific researcher, and it took us 2 years to put this together. And the reason, I mean, I never imagined doing this in front of a group of people. I really did it for my sons and for my grandson, that they would have the legacy, that this would be something that they would know, and hopefully give them the strength of character that this is what they came from.
And I think we have decided to put it out because well, to honor Gaston, but also so that people do not forget and cannot see how little progress man has made in 80 years.
And when you see and we talked about this with the high school class when we did the presentation there about the resurgence of anti-Semitism in this country, Trump, the Proud Boys, and if you have ever seen the Proud Boys on TV, they have a sign that they make, which is so similar to the Heil Hitler sign. So that's one of the reasons that we thought we need to do this, and we need to present it to people, and we need to present it to young people, so they should be aware of what is going on right now. Any other questions?
Brava.
Oh.
When I saw your presentation the first time at the French group.
Yes, we did our presentation the first time for the French club that we belong to.
You mentioned that the first time Gaston got captured when he was turned over to the French collaborative
Right.
police, that it was possibly his sister.
Right, and this is
And I thought that was such a poignant story because it's not known exactly, but it's how things happen also inadvertently.
yes. Well, the French police in Saumur were alerted by the Germans that he had escaped with his friend René Moutarde. And the story that my father told me was that the police came to the house. His sister, who was 17 at the time, was afraid, naturally, and that she gave him up, that she said he was hiding in the countryside with his uncle. When I went to France and spoke to her children, who were my first cousins, they tell a different story. And so I don't know what the truth is there. I know he did not have a good relationship with his sister most of his life. Whether it was from that or not, I don't know. So I've left it out of here because I can't really validate it.
I thought it was interesting that her side of the story was that she was trying to protect him or something like that.
Right. Her story was that she was going to riding her bicycle out to the farm to tell him that they were looking for him and that they followed her.
And
so
that she didn't know that she was being followed.
Right, and so I thought that was such an interesting part of the story too, because it shows how I mean, for one thing, well, we can never know all the truth.
No.
And also that things happen sometimes inadvertently in these kind of environments that are so supercharged and so dangerous.
Yes. Yeah.
And so, yeah, I hope.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things too is, obviously he was a survivor, and he came out speaking several languages. A lot of the prisoners lost their teeth because of lack of hygiene and dental care. My father would take a stick and whittle it down to like a pick, and he would work his gums every day, and he only lost one tooth. And he was very proud of that.
But he also lost a lot of weight.
Yeah, I think he weighed 92 pounds when he came out of.
Did you ever find out any more about these various people that he escaped with, the friend who did in the beginning, and then the
No.
small group of them?
No.
Never able to find out any more about
No.
I'm curious, when you presented this to the young people, the teenagers, were they surprised by the story at all, or did they have some familiarity? What was their reaction?
Well, it was an advanced history class. They were seniors studying World War II. And they had all been on a field trip to the Holocaust Museum. So they certainly had a background, and they'd seen all the Auschwitz things. I think they got it. I mean, we had no idea how we would be received. But they really got what we were saying, and especially about making the correlation between what's happening in our country today and what was happening there. And I think what they found particularly engaging was that they were hearing, it's an authentic story. It's an authentic story, and here I am telling it. And I think that I think that meant a lot to them.
And they were encouraging us to continue.
Yes, yes. And the parents of Lauren Cirillo, who was the teacher who got us there, are here. And I think she said that they really enjoyed it. Yeah. Yes, Peter.
You must have been between 6 and 8 when you came to the.
7.
7? Well, that's between 6 and 8.
Yes, it is between 6 and 8.
Last time I looked.
What was it like for you? What was your life like in France, and how did the change to coming to the U.S., how did that affect you personally?
Well, again, in France, I was born and raised to the age of 7 in a small village on the coast of Brittany, which is, I would compare to Palm Beach. It was a very ritzy enclave of villas where people would come to spend the summers. And to this day, it's a very posh resort town, not so much known by Americans, but a lot of the British and the Germans still frequent that town. So it was a very small town. I don't believe I'd ever seen a black person before, and certainly didn't speak English. But I had been in school from the time that I was 2.5. So by the time I left France, I could write and I could read, and I'd already had some schooling. So when I saw for the first time the skyline of New York, it was like, and didn't speak a language. And relatives, and the reason that we ended up in Pittsburgh is that my mother had an aunt who also was a seamstress, who came to France every few years, and they lived in Pittsburgh, so they sponsored us to come to America. And it wasn't because life was bad for us in France. It was my father just was unhappy with the political system after the war, and he wanted to try. And of course, the aunt would say, the streets in America are paved with gold. Which I have never found that street, by the way. Still looking for it. And then to start school. And the neighborhood that we came to was a working class neighborhood in Pittsburgh. We lived on the ground floor was the dry cleaners. The cousins lived on the second floor, and we lived on the third floor. But it was right across from the public library. And so I remember as a child there, going to the library all the time and having the librarians read to me and And of course, playing with the neighborhood kids, in the neighborhood. And I mean, that's how you learn. Within 6 months, Françoise and I were fluent in English. But, I remember, I remember walking from school and being terrified because there was a young black man who was chasing me. And he kept saying, "I ain't gonna hurt you, Chantal. I ain't gonna hurt you." And I was like terrified. And I'll never forget Lavelle Tucker. I still remember his name after all these years. But so it was a whole different thing. Oh, so our first Halloween, we were there in the West End of Pittsburgh, and so we got all dressed up. And our older cousins were supposed to keep an eye on us, and of course they didn't. And we ended up in behind a church where they were having some sort of a Halloween parade and giving out prizes for the best costume. Of course, my parents are at home wondering where we are, and we're terrified, and because we didn't speak the language at all. But we made it home safe and sound, but yeah, it was not pleasant. So. Anything else? Yes.
Can you talk about, if you know, what your father's attitude was towards African Americans after having been saved?
Yeah, my father. He worked with many African Americans when he worked for the county. He never had any bitterness to the German people, because the German women were so good to him in the factories. And I think he was able to differentiate between the German populace and the political structure in Germany. So I never knew him to have any racial bias whatsoever. He didn't, and he certainly didn't raise me that way.
Louise?
Yeah, is that suitcase?
No.
Okay, right.
No.
And I had a question for Sally, because you helped, I know, a lot in the research, and what was it? Maybe I'm putting you on the spot, but was there one thing that you discovered through the research that really surprised you or that you didn't know? What was the thing that kind of blew your mind the most?
I think I have to think long on that question.
Or was it
It
something
was-
that was absolutely not part of the documentation that kind of emerged from the research that was kind of.
There's actually a lot of the history, a lot of the places like Racibourg I didn't know existed
Right.
until I started working with
Yeah.
Chantal.
Yeah. We certainly learned a lot doing the research. And this is another thing that I said to the kids at the high school. I said, ask the questions of your grandparents. I wish now that I had asked him more questions. I don't know if he would have answered them, but ask the questions while you still can, because there'll come a time where you can't.
Louise, another answer to your question was actually something that I just did maybe this morning, because Chantal was saying that her father, the Maginot Line.
Right. He's in the article that is here. He said he told this American POW how he had served in the French Army's Maginot Line before he was taken prisoner. And when I read that, I'm like, and then I looked up the Maginot Line to get more information. I thought, well, how could that have been possible? But then Sally.
Because when he was forced to march from Étampes as far as Maquis, that town is almost on the Maginot Line.
Oh,
Yeah.
So
very, very far in.
yes.
Yeah, so when this article showed up in the local newspaper, this man Becker, who read the article, he had been a prisoner of war, and when he read about my father's experience, he realized that they were in the same situation. So he was the one that came to see my father and they spent a lot of time talking together about their experiences. And he was the one that said, God bless him, he went through hell. He did. Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
So, just as a child, were you afraid? Were you, what did you know as a child going on
About him?
about the war and everything?
As I said, like many veterans of war, he spoke very little about it.
No, your experience as a child, your experience.
My experience living with him?
Well, I mean, you were there during the war.
No. They married in 1946,
Oh.
and I was born in 47. So the war was over.
Okay.
The war was over. Yes, Deb.
Did he have any ill effects from when they cut his tongue?
No.
It all healed?
No. Yeah. The only thing he did have tuberculosis after the war, during the war, but he said that somehow, he recovered from that, but he was sent to a sanitarium outside of Paris before he was returned home. And I can remember that he had an area on his back that would always erupt. And I think that was something that was left over from either being beaten or whatever. It would heal and then it would come back, and it was always there. The thing too was that, do I say he was an alcoholic? He didn't drink every day, and I never knew my dad to miss a day of work because he was hungover. But when he drank, and when you work in the steel mills, you walk across the street for a shot and a beer at the local bars. And if he was contrary, he was contraried by somebody, or he would come home and and my mother would be, and I would be looking at the clock. And if it was 5 o'clock and he wasn't home, we started to get worried. And he could be violent. He could be violent to me and to my mother, and it was part of the post-traumatic stress. And he did as when I was an adult, he apologized to me, and in his last a statement, I guess his last wills and desires after his death, he said, a lot of bad things were done to me, and I did bad things to other people, he said, and I'm sorry. So, well, that's it.
Chantel?
Oh, one more time, Kevin.
Just one comment. Thank you so much for this presentation. It's really